Growing up, I always felt like a bit of a misfit. Hell, I still feel like one. But it was definitely worse at a time when you're developing and unsure of who you're supposed to be. I don't have many pictures of myself during this time, as I had a hard enough time existing in my own skin, let alone being seen in it. My only escape at this time was music. In my developing years, my favorites were definitely that of heavy metal and punk rock. And just like my Serbian and Croatian heritage, they were two opposing figures. In the many internet circles I frequented because I didn't want to go outside, the metalheads hated the punks, and in turn the punks hated the metalheads. It made me feel even more isolated, but people like pauldianno made it seem okay. With his short hair almost in defiance of the long mop surrounding him in Maiden and his guttural shriek, he was a punk in a metal world, and I felt a kinship with him. Paul was always my favorite Maiden singer. And I don't say this as a Johnny-come-lately now that he's dead. I've expressed my love for him several times throughout the channel's history. I have nothing against Bruce, he and the band made a lot of great records. But in my opinion, they lost a big, unique energy when Paul left. Even in the wild early days of new wave of British heavy metal, no metal band had a frontman like Paul Di'Anno. He was their wild card. He was not a Pete Best type character. It's not like Steve was sitting there thinking, oh, we need a singer, this guy will do for now. You don't stay frontman in a band, sing on 2 groundbreaking albums, a live EP, get the band's first hits, perform on Top of the Pops, tour the world as both a supporting act, and as a headliner because you can't find anybody else. That's not how things work, especially for a well-oiled machine like Iron Maiden. You're allowed to not like his voice or the albums he sang on, that's totally fine. But you also don't have to create fan fiction to justify disliking something. If you don't like something, then just say that. There's no shame in it. I don't like Razorfist much, but he's definitely on the money when he talks about how stupid Maiden fans can be. Born Paul Andrews in Chingford, Essex, he was introduced to Iron Maiden. At the time composed to guitarist Dave Murray, bassist and founder Steve Harris, and drummer Doug Sampson by a mutual friend when they told him that they were in need of new vocalists after a prior incarnation of the band imploded. At the time, in true apathetic punk fashion, Paul didn't seem to care one way or another about joining the band who would go on to conquer the world. Until he heard more of the band's material that Steve had written, and he realized that it was something that he just had to do. According to Steve, he wasn't fully into the punk style until only a few weeks into his tenure, at which point, after realizing it pissed off the rest of the band so much, he went even further into it. I'm sorry, but I love that shit. Great tension often makes great music, and I don't know, maybe tension isn't the right word, but that push and pull is what made the band so vital in their early years. With the lineup of Paul Di'Anno, Dave Murray, Steve Harris, and Doug Sampson, and a short-lived guitarist who ended up not being credited, nice one, guys, Paul Carnes or Mad Mac, they recorded their first EP on New Year's Eve 1978 because it was the only time slot the band could afford. And as rough as it is around the edges, it's still clearly Iron Maiden. I just want to see your blood. I just want to stand and stare. They wanted to go back and re-record some things and remix it, but by the time they returned a few weeks later, the master tapes had been re-recorded over, so they had to release it as is. And maybe it's for the best because it's a raw and gritty version of the band that you still won't mistake for anybody else. The tempos are a tad slower, the guitar tones maybe aren't up to snuff, but the band are killing it, especially Paul. Out of everything here, his voice is by far the closest to what it would eventually become on later records. They decided that recording an EP would be the best choice of action because by this point, with the rise of punk rock, it was really hard for them to get gigs, and it ended up working surprisingly well for them. DJ Neil Kay heard it and loved it so much to the point where he was playing it around the clock at his club called the Bandwagon Soundhouse, and everyone in the club just went nuts for it whenever it was played. This helped Maiden so much that when they self-released the EP themselves, they named it the Soundhouse Tapes out of respect for Kay's club and how it helped launch their career. The tape eventually made it into the hands of Rod Smallwood, who would become their longtime manager up until the present day, but before he could actually see the band play live, he saw Steve threaten to punch out the owner of the pub they booked and they couldn't play, and at their next gig, Paul the Mad Lad got himself arrested because he had a knife on him while walking the street. So Rod saw them first as a 3-piece with Steve singing, and Steve couldn't sing. And Paul didn't actually get out of jail until the last 20 minutes or so of their set, and the band somewhat credits that dysfunction and chaos with Rod agreeing to manage the band to begin with. And he put them on the trajectory to eventually getting signed to EMI, releasing their first self-titled album, Iron Maiden. By the time it was recorded, the lineup shifted again. Dennis Stratton joined as the second guitar player, and around this time Doug Sampson just couldn't handle touring and decided to quit, so Dennis recommended his friend Clive Burr, by far my favorite drummer this band ever had. Steve used to be far more adventurous as a bass player on the early records, and Clive could follow him like nobody's business. In fact, Clive was probably at least part of the reason why Steve was so adventurous in the first place. But before Stratton and Burr joined and Doug Sampson left, they recorded a song that would end up as the B-side to their first hit, Running Free, an infectious pop hit called Burning Ambition. It's a major scale triumph that almost borders on the ridiculous considering the material this band would later create, but Di'Anno sells delivery so well I have a hard time caring.
So you think you can know me? Well, you better just think again.
It's one of Steve Harris's earliest stabs at songwriting, and it sounds like it. It's like a weird, bizarre universe version of Iron Maiden that could have been, and I don't know if I would have minded as much. It's just a really fun song. It reminds me a lot of Sweet and a lot of the glam rock bands of the 70s, but even when Maiden were being this merry, it still has a kick-ass solo from Dave Murray. But as the 1970s drew to a close and the 80s began, Iron Maiden recorded and unleashed their classic debut album. And as I've already said many times, this is my favorite Maiden record. The raw production is a feature, not a bug. Is it as finely crafted as some of their later albums? No. But what this album may lack in clarity, it more than makes up with in just pure sonic power and sincerity. On no other Maiden record can you hear the working class roots of this band like you can here. Not to knock the later albums, but they lost a sense of immediacy. Maiden were their own band with no real click. Motorhead shared the melding of genres, but they had been around for years, and the new wave of British heavy metal, as it was known, was a collective scene, but Maiden were just in a league of their own, and I can't quite explain it. This is before metal became such a dominating force within pop culture. The band were fighting an uphill battle against punk, new wave, and the remnants of disco. They were waging a war and fighting tooth and nail. And you can hear it on this record. They barely had any real help in the studio, it was basically self-produced. The producer, if you want to call him that, was a guy named Will Malone. He'd done many odds and ends jobs in the music industry. Metalheads probably heard his work on Black Sabbath's Sabotage, since he's credited with the arrangements and the English chamber choir on that record. To the shock of no one, he was no one's first choice.
Beethoven could have done a better job. And he was deaf for how long?
Someone named Guy Edwards was dismissed since his production was somehow even worse than this. In the Sweets, Andy Scott was considered, but he, for some reason, was insisting on Steve Harris using a pick instead of his fingers, so he was gone. The band tried to make the best of a bad situation with Will, but it just didn't work out as well as they might have hoped.
You know, we come in, you know, all excited in the first album, you know, what do you think of that take then, Will, you know? Oh, I think you could do better. And he'd go back to his paper.
Paul later said, if Iron Maiden actually had a better production, I don't think there'll be any album around to touch it for 1,000 years. The guy who produced it mixed a triangle on the fucking Mike Oldfield album, and that's about all he ever did. But we were so naive, we didn't know what he was doing. And if you're one of those purists who can't accept the sound, I'd recommend you cast your mind back to 1980. Just imagine you're some kid who just bought this record blind based off Derek Riggs' unforgettable illustration. You bring it home, take the record out of its sleeve, gently put the needle down, and hear Prowler for the first time ever. And it's nothing like anything you had ever heard before. You might have heard your fair share of Sabbath, Purple, or Priest, but this Iron Maiden had the grit and spirit to them, and you knew you were on the edge for a revolution. The chainsaw attack of the power chords from Dennis, the Wanfuse opening lick from Dave, and that growl from Paul says more than any actual words ever could. And within 90 seconds, you're already treated to batshit insane transitions, tempo shifts, and blistering solos that spark flames within your speakers, as Paul rejoins the band to show that he can definitely hang with the rest of them. The next track is surprisingly a ballad, which is odd considering how few ballads this band actually have. This is one of 2 songs off this album to receive a Paul Di'Anno co-writing credit. Paul definitely wrote these lyrics, and you can tell because, in contrast to the rest of the album, this song plays with his words in a really abstract way, as one could expect from a song called Remember Tomorrow. It's reminiscent of the way Ronnie James Dio wrote lyrics and how he would paint pictures with words. Paul said he got the name Remember Tomorrow from his grandfather. I lost him in 1980 when I was on tour. He was a diabetic, they cut off his toe and his heel, and he lost his leg from the knee down, and he just sort of gave up. The lyrics don't relate to it, to be honest with you, just the words, remember tomorrow. Because that's what he always used to say. That was his little catchphrase. You never know what's going to happen, remember tomorrow, it might be a better day. So I just kept it in and that was it. The next track also has lyrics co-written by Paul, and it landed them their first appearance on Top of the Pops, which they insisted on playing live. They didn't really do this because they thought miming was lame or anything. I mean, this band has filmed a lot of music videos over the years, and they even mimed to Remember Tomorrow when they appeared on the German music program, Pop Rock. But it was just a subversive act to set themselves apart. If you somehow don't know, damn near every band who was ever on Top of the Pops mimed just to make things easier, as dealing with a live mix of a band can be a real hassle. But Maiden refusing just proved that they weren't like any other band.
I know, I'm not like the other girls.
Paul has said that the lyrics he wrote were pretty much autobiographical to his life, besides the part about spending a night in LA jail specifically. I guess singing "spent the night in a London jail" just was too many consonants. And Paul has said that he wrote the lyrics to Remember Tomorrow and Running Free in about an hour each, give or take. What a legend.
And Running Free is just a perfect, slightly poppy, slightly punky metal song. It's got one of the best hooks this band ever had. It's got the gallop, kick-ass leads, Paul belting it out with everything he has. It's everything great about Iron Maiden condensed into just over 3 minutes. God, I miss those days. Phantom of the Opera was the first Maiden epic, and in 7.5 minutes, it does far more than Trite Like Empire of the Clouds ever could dream of in all of its 18 minutes of tedium. It's an adventure with every concise movement, never overstays its welcome, then transitions so smoothly you don't even really notice. According to Genius, with a quote I cannot find the source for, Bruce Dickinson once said that if you don't get this song, then you don't get Maiden. And I agree 100%. Fuck you, r/Iron Maiden, you fucking losers. But it was almost a very different song. Dennis Stratton said that in the studio he had all these guitar overdubs and layered vocal harmonies, but Rod Smallwood snuck up on him during playback and said, "You can get rid of all that, it sounds like fucking Queen." Which I agree with Rod, it probably wasn't the right move. But Dennis has expressed interest in remixing the song to better represent what it could have been, and I'd love to hear that at some point.
Transylvania is a vicious and frankly iconic instrumental. I've heard very few instrumentals actually work on their own merit. You know, ones that aren't intros or outros, and ones that actually justify not having vocals. And Transylvania is definitely one of them. It takes you on its own adventure, and despite its lack of words, you understand where it's going. Besides, I have no idea where Paul could even try and get a word in edgewise. There's a lot going on here with riffs up the yazoo.
And it melds smoothly into the bizarre sort of slow jam, Strange World. Somewhat Pink Floyd-esque. I'm not sure if you can really call it a ballad. I don't know if it's quite melancholic enough, though it is quite somber. But whatever it is, it's an amazing song that lets Paul show off his subtle croon. The lyrics are either about Transylvania, or vampires, or Dracula, since it segues so effortlessly with previous tracks like One Big Song, or it's just about getting high, and both interpretations work.
Here I am, I'm not really there. Smiling faces ever so red.
Though Steve wrote it, and he's not really a drug guy. Though if you ask original Maiden singer Paul Mario Day, he'll tell you that he wrote it. Make of that as you will. I'm inclined to believe Steve read Dracula and just ran with it. Hell, he wrote Phantom of the Opera after reading that book too.
But I get more out of the song when I view it as being about getting high or drunk. Don't get me wrong, I love songs about vampires. I mean, you know, I love goth rock, but this interpretation just gets me, you know? Besides, Paul is the one singing, literally bringing the words to life, and he definitely did a drug or two in his life, so it works.
Charlotte the Harlot, the only song written by Dave Murray, is about my favorite subject in music. You know, horse. And Charlotte is a big character within Maiden's repertoire. She's at least mentioned on 3 other songs up to and including Fear of the Dark. And as classic as it is, it's probably my least favorite of the album. It's pretty similar to other tracks, and besides being about a working girl, there's not too much unique about it, but it still has all the pieces of a classic Maiden song because it's on this album. Everything these guys touched during this period just turned to gold.
And I guess something had to be the worst, but I say with some certainty that the debut Maiden's worst is still better than most bands' best, and I'll still kill to write something even half as good.
And the final track, the song Iron Maiden, from the album Iron Maiden, from the band Iron Maiden. I just love when that happens. Black Sabbath, Talk Talk, Living in a Box. That's a drop in prestige.
But the title track of the band is nothing if not prestige. Listening to this song, you feel like you're listening to history. More metal bands need to write songs about how they're gonna fucking kill you. It's something that this genre has lacked in recent years.
It's a song that makes you want to mosh, stick your fists in the air, and scream along with the band. It's a total anthem, and I just wish they wrote songs this fun after Paul left. And that's the debut Iron Maiden album. Nothing but class. It's a metal monolith. I don't give a shit that Bruce Dickinson isn't singing because, quite frankly, even if he was, it wouldn't be as good.
You're damn fucking right I said it.
I hate it when Maiden tards say, "Oh, Paul couldn't sing Caught Somewhere in Time or Aces High." Wow, how observant of you. It's almost as if those songs were written for someone with a totally different vocal range.
This just in. Lemmy from Motorhead probably couldn't sing King Diamond's material very well either. And as true as it is that Paul couldn't sing Bruce's stuff, have you heard Bruce try and sing pauldianno's material? Most of the time it fucking sucks. Sure, he might hit the correct notes, but the timbre of his voice just sounds wrong trying to sing it. And he doesn't have the attitude to sell it like Paul could.
But I'm sure you're thinking, "Oh, come on, James, surely you have something to critique. You can't be that much of a shill." Okay, fine. But I must emphasize that these are small gripes. Microscopic gripes. I don't particularly like the lyrics of Charlotte the Harlot. They're a little dehumanizing. Steve's bass tone is a little muffled and clanky for my taste, but that's it. And I had to really pull a Halo reach in order to conjure up those criticisms. This record reads like a greatest hits. I don't know what else to tell you.
Besides the album itself, we have the non-album single, Sanctuary, which is one of the punkier songs this band ever did, mostly relying on Paul's attitude to keep the song rolling along with a lot of great bass lines from Steve.
It was actually the second track on the US pressing and the 1998 remaster, which is the version I listened to predominantly as a kid, so in my heart of hearts, this is part of the album. But I guess I can kind of see why I was left off, just leaving this album to 8 kick-ass songs. No more, no less. They also recorded a cover of a song called Women in Uniform by Australian band Skyhooks. It was recommended by their publishing company, and they got to work with Tony Platt, who was a mixing engineer for AC/DC. Steve thought that this was a good sign, so they agreed until they found out that Platt and Dennis Stratton had gone behind the band's back and cleaned up the mix to try and get a hit single for the band. After this, Tony Platt was fired, and after recording the band's first ever music video, so was Dennis. And disregarding the drama, Women in Uniform is a fine song. It feels like a better vehicle for Paul to do his thing than the rest of the band, though they have their moments too, like the twinning lead guitar section. When Dennis was given the boot, Steve Harris has said there was quite literally musical differences, which is believable since he fucked with the Women in Uniform mix so bad, and he tried to add Queen guitar and vocal harmonies to Phantom of the Goddamn Opera. Though I have heard rumblings that he never really got on with Rod Smallwood, apparently he would get really mad at Dennis when he would mingle with other members of other bands, and he didn't appreciate that he listened to bands like Whitesnake, which I could believe, especially when you watch the Early Days documentary and compare how Steve and Rod speak about Dennis.
It's a shame. I mean, Dennis is a nice bloke. Great guitar player.
Dennis we weren't convinced of his commitment to the band or the music.
Though a lot of this is conjecture, so take it with a grain of salt, especially since Steve loved prog rock and other music that wasn't exactly metal. Who knows what actually went down? But there was definitely some credence in there being musical differences, since the band often said that he seemed more into playing stuff like Strange World than other songs. And people like to dog on Dennis a bit, but he was pretty important to the band establishing their sound. Like with Phantom of the Opera. Sure, he added all that weird shit that got cut, but the vocal harmonies that are still there were apparently his doing. And I'm inclined to believe it because we haven't really heard anything like that since. And he says that he also contributed to songs like Running Free, Sanctuary, and even much of the Killers album, since those songs were written quite a while before they were recorded. People seem to forget that just because someone isn't listed as a co-writer, it doesn't mean that they don't matter. Arrangements are incredibly important to songs. To replace Dennis, they got a childhood friend of Dave Murray, Adrian Smith. Hell, David sold Adrian his very first guitar. And the band had already tried to get him to join, but he was still in another group. But Adrian eventually joined and would stay with the band for many years, until he didn't.
Then we get to Killers, and by the first few notes, you can hear the sonic improvement thanks to Martin Birch, a man who was already a legend thanks to his engineering and production credits with Fleetwood Mac, Deep Purple, Whitesnake, Rainbow, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, among others. He was already aware and interested to produce Maiden for their debut, but the band declined to ask because they thought he was too big and famous to even consider it. It goes to show, kids, always shoot your shot.
And it just feels more Iron Maiden. Eddie has a slight makeover, Martin's production is crystal clear, but also powerful. Adrian and Dave play as well as you'd expect two childhood friends to, and Steve's bass takes its rightful spot in the mix, being the glue that holds the band together. God, and his bass lines were just way more fun and adventurous. He was all over the fretboard. Same thing with the debut, but it was a bit hard to hear there. I know they later went on to go into a more epic scope on later albums, and that doesn't really leave as much room for crazy bass runs, but come on, Steve, I know you liked bands like Yes, just unleash your inner Chris Squire.
The opening song of Killers is The Ides of March. As an instrumental, it's not as fully fleshed out as Transylvania, but its purpose is to mainly be an intro to the album and to fan favorites, Wrathchild.
A blistering piece of metal with the improved sound and Adrian Smith's introduction. We feel a bit less punk instrumentally, but Paul's voice still has that great gruff bark to it. And with Martin's production, it sounds even better with a touch of reverb and power. And Paul's voice in general is just in far better shape. The bellow he was known for is even fuller and richer. It even hits some pretty great high notes. There's a reason they still play this song live to this very day. Murders in the Rue Morgue is absolutely batshit insane. It starts with this great slower section with soaring leads, then jumps the BPM up a few hundred notches while Paul regales you with lyrics inspired by the Edgar Allan Poe story of the same name. Musically, it reminds me a bit of the heavier punk bands like GBH, albeit a few steps higher up the evolutionary spectrum. Still love GBH though. I especially love Clive's performance on the song. The way he drives the track is immense. He was such a great engine and never let the band let up with his time changes and pure blistering speed. And he could even kind of let it swing like in the chorus.
Another Life is another great song, but it's here where you can tell how much of this album was made up of songs that didn't make the debut. How there's bootlegs of Dennis Wilcox in this track, the guy who was in the band before even pauldianno.
And you can kind of tell it's on the transitions. They're a bit sloppier compared to other tracks, like with the 3 verses, one after another, all with the same lyrics. It's a bit weird, and it makes sense. Bands have their whole lives to write their debut, but only a few months to write their sophomore effort. These things happen. But with that being said, we're treated to maybe the best guitar solos on the album, and the pure intense speed this track can generate is enough to keep your attention as a listener.
Genghis Khan is cool, it's an instrumental, but I'm not sure whether this album needed more than one. I think they probably could have melded this with Ides of March and had an instrumental for the ages, but as it stands, it still rips.
Especially when it kicks it up a notch about a minute in, you hear what Clive is doing, he's going absolutely apeshit. I'm not kidding, this is about as fast as metal drumming got before blast beats became a thing. And one of the first ever blast beats heard on record was Stormtroopers of Death's Milk in 1985, and drummer Charlie Benante credits Clive Burr as one of his biggest influences, so there you go. Innocent Exile starts with a pretty tasty bass from Steve that goes into a Led Zeppelin-esque groove. Also, it's worth noting that this song is a sequel, kind of, to Murders in the Rue Morgue, following a man on the run. As we flip the record over, we get the title track, and almost immediately we hear more of pauldianno's piercing shrieks. The song even features lyrics written by Paul, making it the only song of this album not solely a Steve Harris composition. And I love the words so much, even though it ain't exactly deep. It's about a madman killer. I love the way Paul uses his words, like you're reading an old pulpy crime novel.
Innocent victims are slaughtered with wrath and despise. A mocking religion of hatred that burns in the night.
Also, I love the guitars hammering natural harmonics in the verses. They had such great tension. They sound like shivers going up your spine. Though I will say, it's kind of funny how they follow up a song like Innocent Exile, a song about a guy wrongfully accused, with this. I'm not sure if they're trying to say something there, but I think it's kind of interesting.
Now for my personal favorite song of this record, and maybe my favorite Maiden song, period, now that I think about it. Prodigal Son. Ever since Paul's passing, this song has really grown on me. I was listening to Killers a few days after it was announced that Paul died, and when this song came up, I just kind of stopped in awe, you know, and I listened to it a few more times before I went to the next track. I won't lie, I got a bit emotional, and I usually don't get that emotional when musicians I admire die. Not Eddie Van Halen, not Christine McVie, not Wayne Kramer, not Grant Hart, not Malcolm Young, not Slim Dunlap, who was in my all-time favorite band, The Replacements. Not that I don't appreciate them or anything, of course I appreciate them, but at the end of the day, I just don't know them. You know, I don't know them personally. So it's not as if I'm gonna cry like I did when my grandma died, but listening to this song a few days out from Paul's death, it just hit me different. You know, I was sitting in a library trying to be quiet, having a mini existential crisis over an artist who I've listened to since my age was in the single digits. Maybe I'll feel like this again when people like Paul Westerberg, Paul McCartney, Robin Zander, Ozzy Osbourne, or anyone from the original Kiss lineup dies, but I guess we'll see.
The track itself is so lush with the first use of acoustic guitars on an Iron Maiden record. Steve's bass is on another level in this track. He's almost doing his own thing entirely, but he never strays too far. And Clive's ability to add to tranquil nature and atmosphere while still letting his chops shine is something to behold. Lest we forget Adrian Smith's guitar solo. God damn. The lyrics are about a man who played with black magic for far too long, only to plead and pray to Lamia, a monster from Greek mythology who fucking eats children for help. You know it's bad when you're asking for help from someone like that. And when this song got to me, I couldn't help but quite literally see Paul within the narrator of the song.
Obviously, Paul never meddled with that shit, but he did enjoy his fair share of alcohol and drugs, and I don't want to get preachy. I mean, I had my fill of alcohol over the Christmas break, but it was a big obstacle for Paul throughout his life, especially when his legs went bad, likely due to alcohol and or drug complications, leaving him in a wheelchair for the last few years of his life. It was pretty sad.
Combine that poor health with his poor performance at many shows. Hell, he came to Australia like a year ago, and I didn't even know about it until I read a few articles about how bad the shows were. Damn. So when I listen to this track, I don't hear a song about a guy who played with forces beyond his comprehension. I just hear Paul sing of his struggles. And since Iron Maiden a couple years back helped pay for his knee surgery he was undergoing, I guess Lamia did help him after all. Even though he obviously never walked again, I hope at least the pain was easier for him to handle. Bruce has even shown some interest in performing this song live, and with the upcoming tour focusing on, the stuff people actually like, I see no reason why they can't bust this puppy out. I even think, unlike most Diano songs, Bruce could probably do the song justice. Come on guys, do it for Paul.
Anyway, let's keep this train going with Purgatory. It's such a ferocious cut with Clive and Steve playing off each other so well. Those two are going absolutely nuts without the song coming off its rails, and it sounds like it could at any moments, but it never does. Even the repeats of the chorus don't hurt it. If the song was on the Final Frontier, it would have been repeated approximately 17,000 more times.
The final track, Drifter, is a bit different to the more maudlin cuts of this record. It's basically a love song. Paul even sings about wanting to cuddle up next to a chick he's singing to and scream about wanting to rock and roll. It's ridiculously wholesome while still wrapped in your usual Maiden hallmarks. Though I can hear some of the more bluesy, 50s rock and roll inspired shuffling to the guitars in the verse.
And that might be the end of Killers, but once more, there's a non-album single, Twilight Zone. Though like Sanctuary, it was included in the 1998 remaster right before Drifter. The verses don't impress me too much. At first you can kind of see why it wasn't on the album proper. Then the chorus comes in and... Jesus Christ. Maybe Paul's best vocal performance, and it wasn't even on the album. They did my man dirty. Combine that with an amazing solo section and lyrics about a dead man's ghost watching his girl suffering and alone, all contained in 2.5 minutes. These guys were superhuman.
Look, I can kinda see why some Maiden fans may not get the debut. Not you, Steve. The production can just be a bit too much for people to stomach, and all jokes aside, look, I get it. Not everyone can unironically like the production of Kisses Hotter Than Hell like me, but if you call yourself a Maiden fan and don't like Killers, what the fuck is wrong with you? Are you that much of a Dickinson shill? Even Bruce thinks you're nuts. I would say I prefer the debut just because it's such a strong string of hits that I don't think they ever really topped. And me being the punk shill I am, I just love the lo-fi feel. Though I can see Killers has the better objective sound quality and arguably higher highs, so I can totally see why people prefer the band's sophomore effort.
After Killers, they released the Maiden Japan EP, which is by far the best Maiden live release in my opinion. I wish they released the whole show, though bootlegs exist if you're into that sort of thing. And while it's not exactly a must-buy for most people, if you're a Maiden fan, then I'd say it's worth listening to just to see the kind of live energy that Paul was capable of.
But Paul wasn't long for the band. Hell, the original cover of Maiden Japan was Eddie holding a decapitated Paul head, but it had to be changed when Derek Riggs was informed that Paul was leaving the band. There's a few reasons why Paul was let go. His alcohol and the drug issues were starting to rear their ugly head. And I believe more so that he just couldn't really handle the rigorous touring that the band was doing. And if he couldn't handle the Killers tour, he certainly wouldn't be able to endure the tours later on in this band's career. Paul later told Metal Hammer, I don't blame them for getting rid of me. Obviously the band was Steve's baby, but I wish I'd been able to contribute more. After a while that got me down. In the end, I couldn't give 100% to Maiden anymore, and that wasn't fair to the band, the fans, or to myself.
Paul wasn't fired just to make way for Bruce. Bruce was already in a different band at this point and committed. Besides, they tried a different singer before even approaching Bruce.
We actually tried Terry Slessor. I mean, he's a fantastic singer, and some songs sounded brilliant, but other songs like Iron Maiden or stuff like that didn't really work. Bruce was the one we wanted, but obviously he was with another band, so it was like a question of going and nicking him from another band.
If Paul could hack the touring and wasn't a drugged out mess, I see no reason why they would dump him. They had a good thing going. People loved Paul. People forget that when bands like Metallica were forming, they were influenced by Iron Maiden, but specifically the Anno version of Iron Maiden. And bands such as Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, Exodus, Creator, and many others will all tell you the same thing.
I hate this constant downplaying of Paul's contributions. No one else in metal at the time had a frontman like Paul. He set them apart and helped put them on the path to becoming the band that they were. It's no coincidence that by Number of the Beast, they became household names and headlining acts all over the world. It doesn't matter how good Number of the Beast was. If it was Iron Maiden's debut, it would not have done as well as it did because they wouldn't have had the momentum that Paul gave them. Maiden themselves will tell you this, but mouth breathers will be quick to say, well, actually, to the band themselves. If you prefer Bruce Dickinson, good for you, so do most people. But I don't think Bruce either needs or wants fans of his to shit-talk his predecessor to such an extent. Rod Smallwood has said himself that sacking Paul wasn't to try and find someone better. It was just to keep the band together.
It was never a situation of, oh, we want him in, he's going to go. It was more of, he's going to go, let's look round. These things weren't made for an improvement, they were made out of necessity.
Did Paul have his issues? Absolutely. I never want to read his book, because apparently it really changes how you view the guy, and there's no real excuse for likening Steve and Rod Smallwood to Mussolini and Hitler. People will be quick to bring up the fact that Paul's later bands never attained the fame that Maiden did, but that's what happens to most people who leave big bands. There's a lot of luck, hard work, and clever marketing that goes into breaking a band. It doesn't matter how good the music is. Bruce's solo records never sold Powerslave numbers, but I don't see his Julie fans call him a failure over it. Metal fans will be the first to tell you that just because something is popular, it doesn't mean it's good. That's the language they use to dismiss stuff like pop music all the time. But when it comes to things like this, apparently that sort of reasoning is okay. And everyone just dismissing stuff like Battlezone or Architects of Chaos are just coping, because I doubt they ever gave those records the time of day. After all, it's far easier to pretend to know it all on Reddit. God, I hate Reddit.
But fuck the naysayers. Paul was a legend, and his contributions to Iron Maiden, metal, music will never be forgotten. Even with how bad that last Australian tour turned out, I still probably would have gone if I had the opportunity. The guy meant a lot to me, what else can I say? Rest easy, Prodigal Son. We'll miss you. But that's about it. What's your favorite Diano songs, memories, anecdotes, anything really? It's just an excuse to talk about Paul. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and all that good stuff. And until next time, take it easy, party people.
See, it was me. I've done it all, see? See? Better than Elvis.